Hello and welcome to NTV Uganda on this special live broadcast. I'm Idris Matusegawa, and today we join the rest of the world to commemorate, we join the rest of the world to commemorate the World Refugee Day 2025 with the global theme in solidarity with refugees. Now more than ever, now more than ever, standing with refugees means amplifying their stories, their rights, and their resilience. Uganda is known for its progressive open-door refugee policy, continues to host over 1.5 million refugees. Did you know that? The highest in Africa, many of whom are women and children. Now, this hour-long conversation, brought to you by the Refugee Law Project, focuses on key issues affecting refugees in Uganda, that is empowerment of women in settlements, tackling gender-based violence, and promoting economic self-reliance. Joining me in studio are three incredible voices doing the work on the ground and in the policy spaces. Ms. Susan Alupo, Program Manager, Access to Justice at Refugee Law Project. Ms. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Idris. A good morning to all our dear viewers, and please stay tuned.
Indeed. Mr. Innocent Ndahiro IGAD, National Coordinator, Uganda, Forced Displacement and Migration. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much.
Looking dapper.
Thank you.
We should take fashion choices from you.
Thank you very much.
Indeed. And on my far left, Mrs. Patience Katenda, Legal Advisor, Refugee Law Project. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Idris. Good morning to all our viewers.
Well, for you who has just joined us, we are tackling the refugee rights and commemorating World Refugee Day 2025 under the global theme in solidarity with refugees. Now, let's dive into the heart of this conversation. For you to stay in the conversation and join us, go to our social media platforms. That is on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. Look out for NTV Uganda and use the hashtags World Refugee Day, hashtag with refugees, hashtag refugee rights, hashtag support refugees, and hashtag refugee stories. Share your experience, your insight, and probably a question, one or two, that shall be answered. Now, to start the conversation, I'll go to Ms. Susan Alupo. Susan, why is it important to celebrate and commemorate World Refugee Day here in Uganda?
Thank you so much, Idris, for that question. Good morning, our dear viewers. My name is Susan Alupo, and I work with the Refugee Law Project. We are a community outreach project of the School of Law, Makerere University. And our vision is to ensure that all people enjoy their human rights irrespective of their legal status. Idris asked an interesting question on why we celebrate the World Refugee Day. So each year on the 20th of June, Uganda joins the rest of the world to commemorate the World Refugee Day. This is a day that was designated by the United Nations for refugees and asylum seekers. In Uganda, we are currently having our national celebrations in Chiriandongo district. Chiriandongo district is a host to over 150,000 refugees and asylum seekers. And most of them are from South Sudan. We have refugees from Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we're also hosting refugees from Kenya. Interesting to note is that Chiriandongo is also a host to internally displaced persons, specifically those who fled due to the landslides in Bududa. So as we speak to you now, we have celebrations ongoing in Chiriandongo district. Now, there are various reasons why we commemorate the World Refugee Day, and I'll stick to some. One is that the World Refugee Day is a day where we honor and recognize persons who have fled from their countries of origin to seek protection or to seek a safe haven in host countries. Ladies and gentlemen, seeking asylum is an involuntary act. No one desires to leave their own countries and move to other countries. If it were possible, everyone would desire to be in their countries. However, we have factors that drive people out of their countries of origin. It could be because of political persecution. It could be because you're persecuted on grounds of your race, your religion, your nationality, or because you belong to a particular social group. In Africa, we are seeing that most of the refugees and asylum seekers are moving because of political instability and conflict, which has been sweeping the region for a long period of time. So today we honor and celebrate the refugees and asylum seekers. Secondly, is we celebrate their strength and courage. When you move from one country into another, there are several challenges you grapple with before, during, and after conflict. In our interaction with refugees and asylum seekers, many of them have witnessed their loved ones get killed during conflict. We have those who are victims of sexual violence. We have people who still suffer from trauma, depression, and anxiety. While we celebrate World Refugee Day, we celebrate their courage, we celebrate their strength, and just for the people viewing, there are different categories of people who move into the country. We have the unaccompanied minors, we have young people, we have the elderly, we have persons with disability. So today we celebrate that courage, we celebrate that strength. And Idris, just to note that World Refugee Day is also important because we acknowledge and appreciate the humanitarian actors who have been very instrumental in supporting refugees and asylum seekers.
Indeed.
When they come into the country, many of them grapple with a number of challenges, including access to justice, access to health care, access to education. So we have humanitarian actors, civil society organizations, and development partners who've been very key in extending support to refugees and asylum seekers. So we want to appreciate you for your passion, for your commitment, and for your dedication in the support for refugees. I will not forget that today we also appreciate the government of Uganda. Uganda has been a host to refugees and asylum seekers for a very long period of time. As early as the 1940s, Uganda hosted the first Polish refugees fleeing the devastations of World War II. As we speak now, Uganda is still open to hosting refugees and asylum seekers. So I want to appreciate the government of Uganda for allowing refugees into the country, but also providing support to them. This month, the national budget was being read, and we could see that there's been an increase in the budget on health. There is going to be improvement on health centers in the various districts. So we have districts that are hosting refugees. They too are going to benefit from this. We also see that there was an increase in the budget on education, specifically primary and secondary education. So the refugee hosting districts will benefit from this, but the refugees themselves residing in those districts will be able to benefit from this. So this is in line with the National Development Plan 4 that the government of Uganda has ensured that there is inclusion of refugees and asylum seekers, which is a plus, and today we appreciate the government. As I wind up, or as I conclude why we celebrate World Refugee Day,
Indeed.
It's a platform where refugees will voice out the key challenges they grapple with. In Chiriandongo today, refugees are going to be given a platform to voice out what is working for them and what is not working for them. They will later share recommendations to a range of actors, including the civil society actors, including the government of Uganda and NGOs, to see how we can improve the integration process for refugees and asylum seekers. So let's stand in solidarity with refugees, ladies and gentlemen. Let's work with them and let's support them.
Indeed,
thank you so much.
Tomorrow you could be a refugee yourself.
That's true.
And sometimes when we hear such words, they seem far away from us because it has never happened to you. It hasn't happened to someone you know. And when you see people coming into your country, probably a few group of people might look at it as a burden. But tomorrow it could be you. Now, Susan, you mentioned that we are celebrating people, the government of Uganda adopted an open door policy whereby anyone can come. And it has been globally recognized for that. What does this policy actually mean, and why does Uganda continue to host refugees despite our economic limitations?
That's a very interesting question, and on a number of forums when we've been training actors, many people ask the same question. Yeah. Why does Uganda continue to host refugees, yet the country is also dealing with internal challenges? We have a range of Ugandans who are out there still seeking for employment. So why do we host refugees, and why the open door policy? So I will start with your question on why the open door policy and what the open door policy means for us. Now, the open door policy means that Uganda allows refugees to freely come into the country. There are no limitations and restrictions. When refugees come into the country, they decide where to settle. You can opt to settle in the settlements, or you can opt to live in the urban settings. Now, refugee settlements are gazetted places where refugees and asylum seekers settle. Those who opt to live in urban centers should be able to sustain themselves and sustain their families. When you compare this to the policy in Kenya, Kenya is operating an encampment policy. All refugees and asylum seekers are supposed to live in a designated place. So you see that the open door policy in Uganda is quite liberal because you can decide and choose where to stay. The open door policy of Uganda also means that we have no limitations on the number of refugees and asylum seekers coming into the country. Most of the developed countries have a ceiling on the refugees and asylum seekers they admit. In Europe, some countries don't take in more than 100. Others have a ceiling of 200. But for Uganda, we don't have a limitation on the number. Last week, I was speaking to one of our field office coordinators in Lamo. Lamo is a district in northern Uganda, and we have a settlement there called Palabek Settlement. He alluded to the fact that we have over 50 to 60 new arrivals from South Sudan. And this number is likely to increase. So the open door policy means we freely allow in refugees. We have no limitations in the number of refugees and asylum seekers coming into the country. And that is why, Idris, Uganda is the largest refugee hosting country in Africa. We currently actually have 1.8 million refugees and asylum seekers as of May 2025. And this number is likely to increase given the political upheaval in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We are having political instability in Sudan. We are currently still having political instability in South Sudan. So the number of refugees is likely to go up. A question on why Uganda still opens its borders for refugees and asylum seekers. One of the reasons is that Uganda is bound by law. We ratified instruments at international level, at regional level, and at national level. When a country ratifies instrument, it means you are bound by the instruments. You must implement the commitments you signed to. In 1951, the Refugee Convention was passed. This is the global framework for the protection and management of refugees at international level. Uganda, as a party, assented to this document in 1976. So from then onwards, we were bound by our commitments at international level. Similarly, we are party to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And under Article 40, it says, everyone has a right to seek and enjoy asylum in other countries from persecution. Uganda ratified this instrument in 1962, meaning we are bound to receive, accommodate, and host refugees as an international obligation. When we trickle down to regional level, Uganda has assented to a number of regional instruments. That's the African level. In Africa, or at the African level, we have what we call the OAU Convention, governing specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa. Uganda is party to the 1969 convention, and in 1967, Uganda assented to this document, meaning at the African level, we are bound to receive and host refugees as a country. When we go down to the national level, we have domesticated some of these laws. We have the Refugee Act, we have the Refugee Regulations of 2010. So as a country, we receive refugees and asylum seekers because this is our obligation under law. Secondly, Idris, while Uganda hosts refugees and asylum seekers is because of our turbulent past. Uganda as a country has also experienced conflict, and the conflict has swept the various parts of the country, but the most spoken about conflict was that between the Lord's Resistance Army and the government of Uganda that lasted for more than 20 years. Through this conflict, we saw a range of human rights violations. We saw commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity. But during this time, many Ugandans sought asylum in other countries. Kenya opened its borders for Uganda.
Indeed.
Rwanda opened its borders for Uganda. We have a number of Ugandans who sought asylum in developing countries in Europe and in the US. So these countries opened their borders to receive Uganda. So in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, and with an understanding of what displacement entails, Uganda continues to open its borders for refugees and asylum seekers. Now, the third reason why we are hosting refugees is because of the geographical location of Uganda.
Yeah.
We are at an epicenter of a region characterized by conflict and political instability. Now, the Great Lakes region for long has been swept by conflict. Most of our neighboring countries have been in conflict for a long time, and Uganda has been relatively stable. So because we are at an epicenter of a region characterized by conflict and political instability, it becomes easy for people to access Uganda and come in as refugees and asylum seekers. And as I wind up, hosting refugees is a humanitarian act. On humanitarian grounds, Uganda is allowing refugees and asylum seekers. These are our brothers, these are our sisters who are experiencing challenges. Would you rather have people perish in their countries of origin or open their borders and share the meager resources we have? That is food for thought for all those who are watching. Thank you so much.
Susan, as you have uniquely described and demonstrated that Uganda, because we have an open door policy that is uniquely us, and when you look at other countries in Europe, America, they do not have that. Question would be, when refugees come into the country, because you say they are free to integrate in society, not to live in camps as it is done in Kenya, does that mean that when a refugee steps ground on the Pearl of Africa, they indeed have rights of citizenship?
Thank you for that. That's not true. When you step into the ground as an asylum seeker, there are procedures and processes that you have to go to. Actually, when you cross a country, you first become an asylum seeker.
Okay.
You declare your interest that I want protection in Uganda. Now, the government of Uganda, through the Office of the Prime Minister, has procedures that have to be followed for people to legalize their stay. And the Refugee Act is clear that you have 30 days within which to make your stay legal in Uganda. So you go through the processes of explaining your case.
Yeah.
Why? But we also have prima facie, where people are granted status on the face value. If there is political instability in South Sudan and there is a mass influx of people, on the face value, Uganda will grant you status because there is instability in the neighboring countries.
Indeed.
So becoming a citizen of Uganda is not automatic. When we speak about durable solutions for refugees and asylum seekers, and one of them is local integration. Within local integration is an aspect of citizenship through naturalization. But also there is a process and a procedure that you must accomplish to become a citizen of Uganda. The Citizenship and Immigration Control Act is clear that you must have lived in the country for 20 years, you speak one of the local languages, and you're willing to become a permanent citizen of Uganda. So there are forms at immigration that people are supposed to apply for and await such decisions. So it's not automatic that when you enter the country, you become a citizen.
Thank you. Mr. Innocent Ndahiro, IGAD, National Coordinator, Uganda, Forced Displacement and Migration. Innocent, IGAD has been instrumental in shaping regional responses to displacement. How has IGAD or is supporting countries in Uganda, like Uganda, especially in the face of dwindling international support and funding?
IGAD in full is, we call it the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and this is a REC, or what we call a Regional Economic Community, that was started in 1986 with Uganda as a founding member state. And the main purpose of finding or of establishing this body was to bring together the current now 8 countries in the Horn of Africa. That is Uganda, Kenya, South Sudan, Sudan, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, and Eritrea, to tackle issues or challenges, especially relating to climate, change. And along the way, of course, there were issues of socioeconomic development. So these 8 countries are what form or the body that we call IGAD, with the highest organ being the heads of states of these countries. So we are a secretariat who support these 8 countries, including Uganda. And I happen to sit here in the Uganda mission as the national coordinator on issues of refugees and migrants. What IGAD is doing in relation to, refugee issues is to bring together these 8 countries, especially on issues of policies. As my colleague Susan has indicated, these 8 countries at different levels, they have been having different policies when it comes to refugee issues. And we think as IGAD, we need to see how we can, support these member states to harmonize and have some very good progressive refugee policies. Maybe interestingly, I need to indicate that, for example, in Uganda, more than half of the refugees, this is out of the 1.9 million refugees, about 1.2 to 3 million refugees come from the IGAD region. So they come from IGAD member countries. So when we bring together these countries, we're able to have these member states have candid discussions regarding to solutions. How can they support these refugees? But also beyond supporting refugees, how can they address solutions, or how can they find solutions that have caused these refugees to flee their countries? Okay, so these are the efforts IGAD is having in place, and through these efforts we believe we can be able to attain some durable solutions, especially the peace, so that we see refugees going back to their countries of origin. Like South Sudan actually has the highest number of refugees in Uganda. More than half of the refugees in Uganda, more than 1 million refugees come from South Sudan. Then followed by Somalia, Sudan, and then these other countries. So if we can be able to attain some of these wishes of peace in these countries, then we'll see people going back to their countries of origin. So as we work on responses in host countries, we also ensure that the countries of origin, where these refugees are coming from, there are efforts ongoing, especially of peace, but also supporting areas where these people have left, so that when time comes for return, they find these areas much better and easy to sustain these returns. So through these regional policies, like in 2023, we've managed to have all these member states agree on a IGAD regional policy framework on refugee protection, largely framed around the Uganda's progressive refugee policy, which allows refugees, for example, to work, to do business in a bid to see that they are self-sustaining, in a bid to see that the dependence syndrome reduces, considering the continued reduction of funding. And also, once we support these efforts, then you have refugees who are able to sustain themselves. You have refugees who are going to school and thereby getting educated, getting skills through vocational schools. And at the end of the day, these refugees are able to stand on themselves. They are able to be empowered. And when time comes to even go back home, then they go back home better people. Like in Uganda, about 1 million, slightly over 1 million of our refugees are children. This is very serious. So if these children, for example, do not attain education, then you've finished their future. But with the efforts which we really thank the Republic of Uganda, the good policy, the inclusive policies of education, where you're seeing refugee children going to schools just like nationals, not only even at elementary, primary levels, but even in secondary schools, vocational schools, universities, which are allowing these refugees to pay as Ugandans. The impact this is causing in the long term is actually a durable solution. This whole generation of 1 million refugee children, we've impacted it positively. Tomorrow when they go back to their countries of origin, these are going to be the change makers. And this kind of positive policy like Uganda, which we have now brought and made an IGAD regional policy on refugee protection, is causing impact now. Like in Republic of Kenya now, as we speak, they've now agreed to a Shirika plan. Shirika plan now is promoting, it was just launched not very long ago. They are now allowing refugees to participate also in economic kind of activities, to leave the settlements, those who are able to go to urban areas and then do business and also seek jobs. We have also seen the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia pick from this kind of progressive policy through the Maketeti plan, which is also now allowing refugees to leave the camps and also turn the camps into kind of socioeconomic urban areas, which allows both refugees and host communities to do business, to progress in livelihoods, and also move, those who are able to move in urban areas, establish businesses, and so on. So these kinds of efforts, we believe, at the end of the day, a refugee issue is not an issue of a single country. It's an issue that arises when there are conflicts in a country. But these conflicts, at the end of the day, impact across the borders. You find now another country or even other countries are impacted as a result of this conflict. So you can only best handle these impacts, especially these innocent refugees, through these kinds of regional approaches. And IGAD is exactly trying to do that by ensuring that the IGAD member states not only have very progressive refugee policies, but also use this very good organization, which literally is an organization of these 8 countries, headed by the 8 heads of states, to continuously look at these issues, the questions, the causes of this conflict, which is, as I've indicated earlier, something that if we resolve, then the question of refugee will be the end. IGAD has appointed, through the heads of summit, special envoys to look at these issues on a daily. Like we have a special envoy to South Sudan, just to handle and consistently look at this issue of peace. We have a special envoy to Sudan, and this special envoy report to the heads of states occasionally on the progress on these peace efforts. So through this IGAD, we believe if we can attain this peace, then we'll be able to attain the desired goal of IGAD, which is the socioeconomic transformation of the citizens of the IGAD citizens in the region.
Innocent, one of the recurring wishes that I've heard you mention is the refugees' ability to return. Have we had cases of returnees to their motherlands?
Yes, we've registered actually a number of returnees. Even as I speak, like in the case of Uganda, we've had a number of South Sudanese actually cross back to their country. But the continued problem has been the sustainability of these returnees. When they return, what do they find back home?
Indeed.
There are challenges. The socioeconomic infrastructure has been destroyed. There are no health centers or schools or even the general economic kind of situation. The Somalis, every day we have actually a number of Somalis going back home. But when they reach back home, there are challenges of integrating back to where they were. So that's why we're saying as IGAD, we have to go beyond an individual member country and look at also the situation in the country of origin. We ensure that we have, for example, South Sudan and Uganda speaking. If there are efforts as a REC, as an organization, when we are mobilizing resources, we are mobilizing resources for the region to support both responses to refugees in the hosting countries, but also countries of origin where these people have left, so that these resources support these governments where refugees have left to prepare to support areas of return, so that we can be able to ensure a sustained return, which is very, very important. And if we achieve this sustained return, then we have more refugees having confidence in going back home. Yes.
Apart from South Sudan, what other countries in the 8 Horn of Africa group have been mostly affected and probably hosted by Uganda?
Other than South Sudan, which has the highest number of refugees, we have Somalia, which comes in as the second. Then we have Eritrea, which also, as you've seen here in Uganda, I think we have really quite a number of Eritreans. We have Sudanese. Right now, there is an ongoing active conflict with Sudanese really quite a lot here in Uganda. Then we have also refugees from Ethiopia. Largely, those are the main countries. The other countries, Djibouti and Kenya, they are largely really peaceful.
Talking of mobilizing resources, because you've really described and hinted that it is a major factor for the refugees that we are hosting, but also the mother countries that they come from. International funding has been cut off by, of course, the President of the US. Hasn't that affected your work as IGAD? And what are you doing about it, if it has?
Yes, for a long time, as IGAD member states, even as IGAD, we've relied and we continue to rely on international funding. And this is also in every right, the principle of international burden sharing. When we talk about refugee issues, these are not issues of a single country. Either as a hosting country, well, there are issues of a country of origin who have caused them to flee. But at the end of the day, they remain, because as you know, conflict oftentimes has causes beyond a single country which is facing that conflict. So with international, principles and legal frameworks, when it comes to an issue of refugees, we have to see how we can call upon the international community to support. As you may be aware, the international community and most of these countries which have been funding, like the US, the EU, the individual EU countries, are right now invested in different conflicts as well. The Ukraine-Russia war, the most recent now, Israel and Iran, and other conflicts, in the Middle East. So, and the policy shifts. Now, we see funding completely reduced. And this is terribly affecting the response to support refugees in the hosting countries, but even us as IGAD, who, look at regional policy frameworks and approaches to supporting these refugees, we're being affected. So this is calling us to look at new ways of doing things. And we believe the new ways of doing things, we are working closely with our member states to see alternative ways. And I think the alternative ways, we must look at the most tangible issue, which is the question of peace. Like in Uganda, the World Food Program has been giving food to about 1,600,000 refugees. Now, these have been affected. As we speak, they can only now support about about 60,000 refugees only.
Wow.
So what is happening? Refugees are saying we have to go back home, no matter at least we go and die in our countries. So we have to see how we can work with countries, the IGAD member countries, to address these issues that are causing or driving refugees out of their countries. It's beyond resolution.
Of course.
It's beyond resolution.
Mrs. Patience Katenda, Legal Advisor, Refugee Law Project. Can you shed some light on the major challenges refugees and asylum seekers face in Uganda as their host country?
Thank you very much, Idris, for that question. Once again, good morning to you and a good morning to my viewers. My name is Patience Katenda and I work with the Refugee Law Project. It's interesting, as my colleagues were speaking, you will notice, and it's also in so many literature reviews out there, that Uganda has been hailed not only for being a country that supports refugees, but for having very progressive laws, as it does continue in its pursuit for support of refugees. Case in point is what we call the settlement policy or the settlement agenda. This was set up by the government of Uganda with the whole pursuit in mind, being that refugees become self-reliant if they are to integrate very well within our local communities. Yeah. However, it is interesting to note that despite all these beautiful policies that we have, challenges still arise. Actually, refugees have a myriad of challenges that they are facing in the host country. Now, for the purposes of my viewers understanding why Uganda is a host community, we need to understand what a host country means. Simply put, if I could borrow the definition from Webster's Law Dictionary, a host country refers to any country that opens up its borders and allows for migrants to do come in. The reasons could be different, as well as the duration of stay in that country. But as long as the borders have been opened, it qualifies to become a host country. In this regard, Uganda is a host country because Uganda has opened its borders to all our neighbors to come in. The challenges that pertain of these are quite many, like I mentioned, but I will mention a few here. And I will start with the first and major challenge, which is language barrier. We are all aware that the formal language of communication in Uganda is English. Unfortunately, our neighbors are non-English speaking, and it is our neighbors that are spilling into Uganda as refugees and asylum seekers. Case in point, South Sudan is giving us so many refugees at the moment. The same goes for Sudan. Both these countries use Arabic as their main language of operation. If we look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is equally spilling so many refugees into Uganda, their main language of communication is French. When a refugee then moves from South Sudan to come into Uganda, not only are they ignorant of the formal language of Uganda, which is English, they are equally ignorant of the local languages that we use in Uganda. This inevitably makes integration into Uganda very cumbersome. Imagine not being able to help your child with homework because you can't understand the language of communication at their school. We all know that human beings are social creatures. If you cannot talk to your neighbors, you cannot integrate. If I am from South Sudan and I am speaking Arabic and you, Idris, are my neighbor and you speak English or Luganda, we shall not communicate.
Indeed.
Hence,
maybe sign language.
most probably. Yeah. So this makes integration into the host country very difficult. But however, it is important to look at the challenge of language barrier in a two-way. The first I mentioned is the oral language, but then we also go to the written language. Many a time, when forced migrants come into Uganda, they are not lucky enough to come with their academic documents. However, we have interacted with a few who are lucky enough to escape with academic documents, for instance. And we know that when you have academic documents, then your future seems much brighter. For instance, you could apply to join an institution of learning, or you could use that same document to apply for a job, hence enabling your livelihood in the host country. Unfortunately, if you are from South Sudan and those documents are in Arabic, and you take these documents in Arabic to an institution of learning or to a potential employer, they are almost useless as they are at that moment because the Ugandan will not understand what these documents are talking about. Hence, more challenges are created because this means that there is need for these documents to be translated into the English language. This alone presents another myriad of challenges because one, the process is tedious, but above all, it's expensive. And many a time, refugees and asylum seekers cannot pay for that. So they are stuck with academic documents at the end of the day and nothing to benefit from that. But then the second challenge I want to highlight is the issue to do with livelihood. Innocent has rightfully said that the funding base is reducing greatly in Uganda at the moment. Previously, even with the funding base that we had, it wasn't enough. There's a time in 2017 that Uganda held the Solidarity Summit in Kampala, and we attained to raise about 2 billion to help with the burden sharing of hosting refugees in Uganda. Unfortunately, this money was never raised, hence spilling over directly to the forced migrants and refugees. So currently, as we speak, we have two types of refugees in Uganda. Simply put, the settlement refugees, and these are the refugees who come into the country and opt to settle in the various settlements around Uganda. We have settlements in various hosting districts of Uganda, such as Palabekal in Lamo, Maji in Ajumani, name it, all over the country. When a refugee family gets into Uganda and they go to a settlement, remember that Uganda is an agricultural country. So in response to ensuring that you are self-reliant, the government of Uganda, through the Office of the Prime Minister, will allocate that particular family a sizable piece of land. It's interesting to note that this size, the size of land that is given to the refugee family is a 30 by 30. And it is a one-size-fits-all. So Idris, if you have a family of 10 and I have a family of 1, it is a 30 by 30. As a response, refugees are often forced to rely on the host community members. Host community members, just like the host country, refer to the nationals, in this case, the Ugandans. So they are forced to rely on their Ugandan neighbors to be able to rent out a bigger piece of land in order to carry out sensible or practical farming. Remember, on the 30 by 30, you are meant to till that land, but also set up a structure in which you live. What happens, however, is Ugandans are getting, for lack of a better word, extremely creative. They will either hike the price of that land because of so many refugees who want to access the same piece of land, but unfortunately, sometimes they actually go ahead and exploit the refugees by renting out that piece of land to more than one family. With those occurrences, tensions rise between the refugee community and the Ugandan community, making integration even much more harder, let alone survival in Uganda. But then further to prove to that, when we move to the urban refugees refer to the refugees that settle in the urban areas of Uganda. So areas such as Kampala, such as Arua, Ogulu, Mbarara, name it. Statistics as per 2025 June on the Relief Web show that 8% of the recognized refugees registered in Uganda actually settle in the urban areas. If you take a walk in Kampala today and go to areas like Kansanga, Kabalagala, you will see the spike visibly as well. Yeah. If we go to West Nile in Uganda, we have districts right now that host more refugees than nationals. If we move back to the urban refugees, recently the Refugee Law Project conducted a research titled The Challenges Encountered by Forced Migrants in Uganda, with a specific emphasis on livelihood. And in this research, it was clear that most of the urban refugees in Uganda are ignorant of their rights, particularly in relation to employment. What this means is they do not know the rights of being an employer or being employed, and in the worst case scenario, when wrangles arise out of employment, they do not know where to turn for advice or seek recourse. But then still, they are often exploited because of their ignorance. So they are either underpaid or actually underworked. And then the other challenge that majority of the forced migrants in Uganda are grappling with, and for the purposes of my audience, when I refer to forced migrants, I refer to actually refugees and asylum seekers, because their move into Uganda is never peaceful or voluntary. They are forced because they need to survive. So when we talk about them being in Uganda, the other challenge I would like to highlight is their fear of justice institutions, actors, and structures. Idris, if I asked you today to escort me to court for whatever reason, chances are high you'll be like, I will not go to court. You know? So
I'll be hesitant.
Most definitely.
Indeed.
So if you, Idris, would be hesitant to escort me, a lawyer, to court peacefully, imagine how much more a forced migrant is going to be hesitant to access court.
Yeah.
Reason being, one, I mentioned the language barrier challenge. They are ignorant of English, which is the formal language used in all justice actors. And when I talk about justice actors, let's not limit it to the judiciary only. It includes all institutions that work hand in hand with the law. So for instance, the police, the prisons, and a whole host of others all contribute to being justice actors. Many a time, our forced migrants, as they flee from their countries, have been victims of various atrocities by people in uniform. Yeah. So when they then come to Uganda and we are giving them a peaceful haven, they will be very hesitant to ever approach an office where people are in uniform. So even when they encounter conflict in their community, they'll be hesitant to go to the police. Not that they do not trust the police in Uganda, but many a time, them seeing a policeman or anyone dressed in uniform brings back very traumatic memories. They would prefer not to access that institution. But then third, it is interesting to note that till 2025, as we speak, Uganda still does not have a national legal aid policy or law. So what this translates into is if you are to access a justice actor, you have to pay out of pocket, Ugandan or not, refugees inclusive.
No pro bono work?
The only exception we have to that is for persons who have been convicted or charged with capital offenses, the commission of capital offenses. In that instance, the Constitution of Uganda provides that the state, being Uganda, will provide you a pro bono advocate. However, majority of the refugees we encounter are not being charged or are not reporting capital offenses. So that means that they either rely on humanitarian organizations who will provide pro bono services, or they have to pay for those services out of pocket. Idris, my colleagues have both told you Uganda currently is hosting close to 1.9 million refugees. If we counter that to the ratio of humanitarian organizations we have in Uganda that are offering pro bono services, it leaves a lot wanting. So if they are to get services, usually they should pay for them out of pocket. So this leaves a lot of challenges. And then lastly, specifically for the youth, because the youth and children constitute the majority of the refugees we receive in Uganda at the moment. Many a time when they come to Uganda and they cease to be children in brackets, for the purposes of my viewers and for clarity, a child in Uganda is anyone below the age of 18. But for refugee communities, this concept is usually different, because once they cross over from being a child and they cross over to adolescence, adolescence could start as early as 9, 12, or 15. For most of their families, they are considered adults. They have to play their role. They have to support livelihood in that family, such as paying rent, taking care of their younger siblings, usually because one, their parents are not able to fully sustain them, but also many a time, their parents are victims of war-related conflict, and they are still living with those harms in Uganda. So unfortunately for these children, while they are still children, they are forced to take on adult activities, and their coping mechanisms are usually negative. For instance, many boys and girls are being forced into survival sex, or prostitution. Or
marriages.
Or marriage, yes, early marriages, because their families think they are benefiting. But we know that this just breeds more and more challenges for them.
Patience, as we've come into the last segment of our talk show, and briefly, what are some of the innovative approaches that a Refugee Law Project, as a humanitarian company, do you use to reach refugees with these limited access to services like legal aid?
Thank you so much, Idris. It is important to note that at the Refugee Law Project, we use a multi-sectorial approach, cutting across all genders and any strata that would lead to discrimination. And above all, our services that we offer are very community-based, ensuring that at the end of the day, our clients not only receive a service, but they do receive a holistic service that is very client-based. Case in point, if we are to look at justice, if I, as a lawyer, consider justice as winning a case in court, we want our client to be sure that this is what they want. Because for them, justice could mean me and Idris having a conversation and forgiving each other. And that is it. To get back to the innovative approaches we have taken, we have quite a number. The Refugee Law Project has been in existence for over 25 years, actually. So this period has given us so many learning lessons, and we have understood what works best and what doesn't work. The first one I would like to talk about, if you remember as I was starting this conversation, I spoke about the challenge of language barrier. We have come up with our English for adult classes. When a refugee child comes into Uganda, it is easy for them to learn education either at the primary level or at the secondary level, because in both these levels, English is taught as a language in school/subject. But for the adults, who are usually the breadwinners, this becomes quite cumbersome because one, they are not able to attend those classes, obviously because of age.
Indeed.
But then second, since they are breadwinners, they rarely have time to attend school 5 days a week. So innovatively, our classes only last 2 days a week and for 2 to 3 hours a day. And then they're given time to go and attend to other life issues. But then it's also important to note that we do not just teach them English. Our English is titled under a curriculum that says, speak your rights. So as they are learning the English language,
they are learning more about their rights. Patience, exactly. I'm going to stop you there because we have run out of time, but I want to hear from Susan as we conclude this conversation. What specific work is being done to build harmony between refugees and host communities, kind of adding on to the integration, local integration, because I hear some people complain that some of the refugees, when they come here, they don't want to integrate into local communities. Things like men complaining they don't allow us to marry their women, etc., etc. What is being done?
Thank you, Idris. And
briefly,
peaceful coexistence basically means living harmoniously within individuals, within families, within communities, and also at national level. So, with funding support from the Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands, we're implementing a project titled Securing Refugee-Host Relations in Northern Uganda through Enhanced Protection. And the goal of this project is to promote peaceful coexistence between refugees and their host communities. This is in line with the ReHope strategy that was developed by the government of Uganda, where if support is provided for refugees, then a percentage must go to host communities. And the ratio given by the government of Uganda is 70% support to refugees and 30% to host communities. Of course, discussions are ongoing to push this to 50-50. Now, most of the districts that are hosting refugees in Uganda are still dealing with the legacies of conflict. When you look at the West Nile region, districts like Adjumani, Yumbe, Arua, Terego experienced conflict, and communities there are still dealing with the legacies of conflict. Northern Uganda, when you look at districts like Lamu, Kitgum, communities there are still grappling with the legacies of conflict. So if we don't allow refugees and host communities to live amicably, tensions are going to rise. So peaceful coexistence means, what do we do to bring them together? One of the things we do is to engage in intergenerational dialogues. These are dialogues where you bring the young people and the elderly together of different ethnic groups to speak to key issues that are causing tensions, but also understand what the youth are saying and what the old people are saying. One of the drivers of conflict is failed understanding between the young people and the elderly, which is causing tensions. Secondly, we are also doing what we call peace film festivals. We go to the communities, we go to schools, and showcase documentaries that speak to peaceful coexistence. Later, have engagements and discussions with these communities on aspects of reconciliation, on aspects of forgiveness, to see that refugees and hosts are living well. I know you're nodding, but I'm not ending. We have cross-border dialogues. We recently had a visit to South Sudan in Torit, and the governor gave a green light that we need to now start raising awareness to communities at the border points to ensure that the language spoken in Uganda is the same language spoken in South Sudan.
Susan,
to promote peace.
Unfortunately, I'm going to stop you right there because I need to hear from Innocent. Lastly, Innocent, as we look to the future, what opportunities do exist for the member states of IGAD to plan for integration due to the lack of funding that is increasingly an issue? What are the opportunities that do exist? Briefly, Innocent.
Yeah, thank you very much. Member states, you know, as a convener, IGAD being a convener of these member states, they come up with different challenges, as my colleagues have indicated. Indeed. Issues of especially like identity documents, both to use within the country, but also even refugees also move out of the country, not necessarily to their countries of origin. So issues like identity documents, we are now seeing that through this IGAD regional policy framework, then we have refugees. Refugees are able to attain things like a conventional travel document, which are passports for refugees, to move and study, because we are getting a number of scholarships for refugees within their host countries, but even in other different countries. Then there's also a there's been an issue, as my colleague Patience indicated, an issue of academic documents. Refugees, when they reach in the host country, they have academic documents, but which are not recognized by the host countries. IGAD has now come up with a regional education qualification framework, which now member states, the different countries, including Uganda, are now using that regional qualifications framework to come up with a national education qualification framework, so that refugees can now use these documents to further the education, but also get different jobs.
All right, Innocent. Patience, I know the time is running out, but in 30 seconds, give me a must-know for Ugandans towards refugees.
Thank you very much.
In 30 seconds.
This year's theme for the celebration of World Refugee is in solidarity with refugees. Fellow Ugandans, standing in solidarity with refugees should not be a once-in-a-year event. Let's do it every day. Tomorrow, me or you could be refugees. We are all potential culprits. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, my panel. I know I've had to rush you out of here, but thank you so much for the insights and the work you do on ground. And for you who has been watching us, thank you so much for keeping with us. But if you missed this conversation at the beginning, you can catch it in its fullest. Go to our social media platforms, and that is YouTube. Look out for NTV Uganda, and to continue the conversation, use the hashtags World Refugee Day with hashtag with refugees, hashtag refugee rights, hashtag support refugees, hashtag refugee stories. And just closing out the conversation, I want you to understand some of the powerful facts just to reflect on as we conclude this conversation, is that Uganda hosts over 1.9 million refugees, primarily from South Sudan, the DRC, and Somalia, making it the largest refugee hosting country in Africa and third in the world. When they say Ugandans are good people, that is what they mean. And remember, tomorrow you could be a refugee. Some of you are running out of this country. So wouldn't you want to be treated well wherever you go? Keep in touch and stay well, stay informed. Idris Matusaga is my name. See you next time.